Well, good evening or good afternoon, Senator Harkin. It is wonderful to have you as part of our valuable leader conversations. I remember from very long time ago when I finally went into this world of disability business inclusion, yours was a name that came up, and you're highly regarded and respected. So we are delighted to have you with us today. Thank you very much.
Always a delight to be with you.
Now, the thing is, I'm an over talker, so there'll be plenty of questions, but there are a few that we really would love to speak to you about and to draw from your experience, which has been significant over the decades. I know it's a very unique time at the moment, just before the election, so energy is high. And I think that's where I'd really love to begin is, you were so instrumental. I mean, this is the 30th anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act, and you were so instrumental in making that come about. And I'm kind of interested to find out, how are you happy where disability inclusion is today? And what do you see as the greatest opportunities for the next 3 decades ahead? You know, what are your great hopes?
Well, Caroline, am I happy about what's happened over the last 30 years? Yes, but in a measured way. There were 4 goals of the Americans with Disabilities Act: full participation, equal opportunity, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. Well, the last one being employment, jobs. The first 3 we've done pretty well on participation, opportunity. We've seen physical barriers go down all over our country. Places are more accessible, whether they're theaters or sports stadiums or restaurants, businesses. A lot of physical barriers have come down. So more participation. Education-wise, was opened up, so opportunities. Independent living, more people with disabilities not living in institutions, living on their own. The one place where we really haven't made much progress, and this dampens my happiness a little bit, is in employment. The rate of unemployment for adults with disabilities is just about today where it was 30 years ago.
Wow.
And if you talk about the future, what's in the, to me, that's what we really need to focus on. We've come a long way on independence and participation, everything else, but that final frontier is competitive integrated employment for persons with disabilities.
I mean, this is your passion area. I mean, you have set yourself, or the Harkin Institute, a pretty big, ambitious target. Am I correct? I mean, what is the target that you want to see to come to reality?
Well, the Harkin Institute for Public Policy, which is a nonpartisan institute, has set up the summits. We have a summit every year. I know you have participated, thank you, to bring the private sector together with disability advocates and with some NGOs and others to explore ways of increasing employment, looking at what are best practices, what have some companies done that have been very successful in employing persons with disabilities, and enlarging that community and breaking down some of these barriers. So that's is a passion of mine. In fact, when I wrote the Americans with Disabilities Act, there are 5 titles. The first title is employment, because I wanted that to be right out in, but that's the one that we just haven't made a lot of progress on.
We've just seen Microsoft make this huge announcement about disability representation, which is a fantastic move. I think it was 6.1%. And like, that's a beginning, and that's wonderful. But what do you think the barriers are for this, that we're not really seeing change around employment? What do you think that we should be doing? What should we be doing differently?
Well, that's what we've been exploring over the last 5 or 6 years of the summits. A number of factors. Let me put it on the side of the businesses. Human resources in every business, they sort of have a cookie cutter type approach in terms of finding people, employing people to see if you fit into a certain mold. And their approach has not been one conducive to reaching out to the disability community to get them to come in and apply for these jobs. So there's been that lack of outreach. by human resources. Secondly, I think there's some fear perhaps among some employers that if they hire people with disabilities, that then there's all these rules and regulations and laws, and if they mess up one, they're going to be in court and they're going to be sued. And there's just a lot of it's just misinformation and lack of understanding. Businesses maybe understand that the ADA requires reasonable accommodations. Well, they don't know what that means. They don't, but we've set up institutions and organizations to be able to help businesses to meet their reasonable accommodation requirements. Most of them are very small. Most don't require much at all. Now, I will say this, Caroline, on the side of the disability community, there's been a reluctance to go after jobs. Now, why? Well, in many cases, adults with disabilities maybe have tried in the past, but they got shunted aside. Or maybe they got hired and stuck in a dead end kind of job with no advancement, sort of a quote disability job. Maybe they got hired to meet a certain corporate social responsibility requirement, that type of thing. And they found the work experience unpleasant and not conducive to any kind of growth. And so they opt out. And so they're maybe reluctant to come forward again to apply for jobs in the private sector. Secondly, at least in America anyway, the Medicaid system that supports health care for persons, well, let's just say persons with disabilities, has some anomalies in it that if they get a job and they start to work, they may lose some of their benefits. That's more of an unfounded fear than reality, but there's some reality to that. And I'm hoping that the next administration here in America, that will we begin to change the Medicaid model from a healthcare model to a support services model, so that a person with a disability can go to work, can still be able to get their not only their medical services, perhaps, but also things like personal attendance services that they might need once or twice a day during their job. The third element going forward is that in this new regime that we have, there's going to be a new work regime, Caroline, not only in America, but globally. And that new work regime is what? Working from home.
Yeah.
Already, I've heard reports of employers saying they're getting more productivity out of their workers from working at home than working in an office place. Well, that could open up all kinds of possibilities for persons with disabilities.
Also, that some of the ways that we are working now have been ways in which the disability community have been advocating for such a long time. And the business community was like, no, that's too expensive, or we can't accommodate that. And yet, look now, this has actually been a benefit to business, the agility and the flexibility for business to do their job, right?
Exactly. You're right on target. And that's why I think this new regime can be so promising, because now persons with disabilities can now, but in order to do that, we're going to have to make some either changes or modifications or implementations of the law. For example, the ADA requires reasonable accommodations. Well, that's true in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, too, the global convention. Well, for a person with a disability to work from home, what are they going to need? They're going to need high-speed internet.
Yes.
Oh, so who pays for that? Who puts that in as a reasonable accommodation? Well, it seems to me that's either part government and part business, or it could be all business. It could be a combination, but they need that. Secondly, for persons working from home, there's going to be new software platforms. So that software ought to be designed from the very beginning to be accessible to persons with disabilities.
And there's no excuse not to do that now, right? Like, there is no excuse for us not to be building with an accessible mindset from the outset, right?
Exactly. The thing is that people designing the software need to bring in persons with disabilities from the very beginning and say, what do you need to make this accessible?
And isn't that the link to your absolute passion around employment? Because to be able to build this accessible inclusive software, you need the intelligence in your business. So when you link the value of somebody with a disability to bring to the business, therefore you're not bashing people over the head with a stick saying you must employ. It's like, why wouldn't you employ for that insight and intelligence?
Exactly. And we have a lot of data to show that persons with disabilities, again, given reasonable accommodations and support systems, many times are more productive than people without disabilities. More productive. I've had so many employers tell me that the people that they hired that have certain disabilities, whether it's physical or developmental, sometimes intellectual, or combinations thereof, actually are more productive. They get more things done per hour. They focus on their work. They never miss work. They have little turnover, so they save money on training. So in all aspects, many times businesses, their bottom line is better. In fact, we had a study done by Accenture. Accenture did a long-term study, I think it was over 5 years, and they took companies that employed persons with disabilities and those without, and they just wanted to see what did it look like at the end of 5 years. And guess what? The companies that employed persons with disabilities had better profits and better bottom line income than the ones that didn't. And that's because of the productivity of persons with disabilities.
And I wonder also, is it, just thinking about it, is it also that we have, so innovation comes from different ways of thinking and different experiences. So I'm wondering, is with that diversity of thought in the business, do those businesses get competitive advantage because they're seeing different insights into their products and services? So I'm wondering if that is also helping the bottom line from your experience.
Absolutely. That is very true. And again, I think we've seen some data on that in the past of companies that maybe had one product line that they were doing. And by hiring persons with disabilities, they get a better insight. Well, we have a bigger market out there that we hadn't been thinking of before. Sure. Oh, absolutely.
And I think the big thing is, as we look to emerge from COVID, and we can't have any recovery without it being inclusive. We cannot for one moment consider that that recovery does not include the potential and the contribution of 1.3 to 5 billion of our global economy. And I think, you know, there's no doubt COVID has really exposed the inequity in our world. And if you think about the tragic death of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and you know, how in your experience are we going to reset this world? How can we look at intersectionality and the full human experience? And to your point, not be cookie cutter in our approach. What do you think needs to be done from a business leadership and a political leadership perspective?
Just yesterday, I had an interview about education. And I pointed out that in the 1980s, when I was in the Senate, President Reagan asked the business community to come up with some proposals for education. He didn't want any of these pointy-headed professors and all that. He wanted hard-headed business people. And so they set up this committee. And the head of it was Jim Raniere. He was the head of Honeywell at the time. They did a 4-year study, and I'll never forget, it came out in 1991. All these hearings, all of these, everything they looked at, guess what their bottom line was? In order to meet a goal of a more inclusive society and better education and better productivity, we must invest in early childhood education.
Yeah.
So that's a long way of saying to you, what do we need to do? We need to start teaching inclusion and inclusivity early on in childhood. We need to make sure our classrooms are inclusive, to make sure that kids know what that means and have real life experiences. Now, how does that translate to businesses? Businesses, I think, in the private sector need to reach out to their local communities, all the people that work for them. They all go to different schools, they have different, and be a lightning rod, be a promoter in our schools of teaching this kind of inclusivity in our education system. We can't just leave education only to teachers and school boards, businesses need to make their desires known. If you want us as a business community to be more inclusive, please start teaching our kids what that means.
Yes.
And how they can be a part of this inclusive society.
Yeah, because I'm really interested. I mean, everybody knows my passion is about being inclusive business leaders. I'm obsessed with that, that leaders make choices and those choices create cultures. And I'm really interested in the intention and the will of business leaders. They may not know the answers, but it's not okay not to do something.
Right.
I'm just really interested. Why did you decide to lead in this space? You were actually out on your own a lot. And a lot of the leaders that we see in this space have stood alone. And why did you decide to do that? And you've not only did it once, but you've been doing it for years. What compelled you to take a position in this space?
Well, it started with my brother who was deaf, and I saw how he was discriminated against when we were growing up. He was an older brother of mine, and how he was not allowed to do what he wanted to do. He went to a school for the deaf and dumb, as they called it. I remember my brother told me once, I may be deaf, but I'm not dumb. And what he wanted to do, the school wouldn't let him. And he finally found his niche, thanks to the benevolence of a business owner who gave him a job that he loved. This business owner told me later, I didn't know him, told me later, he said, I hired your brother out of the goodness of my heart because I liked him. I felt sorry for him. But after a while, we found out of my 250 employees, he was the most productive employee we had.
Okay.
The most productive. He said, once we finally kind of figured this out, he said, I went out and hired more deaf people because it was better for my bottom line. Later on, I visited Walgreens drugstore in Hartford, Connecticut, one of their distribution centers. They had 800 people working there, and 40% of their employees were persons with disabilities. 40%. All kinds of disabilities. Mm-hmm. And they were paid the same. This was competitive integrated employment. Same pay, same retirement benefits, same health benefit, just like everybody else. The then CEO of Walgreens was Doug Wasson, who was taking me through the plant. And he told me, he said, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. He said, this is my most productive distribution center in America. I get more parts per hour, fewer mistakes. People always show up on time. They're never sick. And I have little turnover, which saves me a ton of money in training every year. So this is my most productive distribution center. So I see these things. I think, why aren't we all doing this? And so, as I said, when I've been involved in disability issues all my adult life, mm-hmm. But since I retired, my passion is employment, because you can break down education, you can do housing, you can do participation opportunity, but if you don't have a job, if you don't have a way of being a professional or being integrated into the workforce of our world, then you're still being excluded from society. So to me, this is sort of, I wouldn't say the final frontier, but it's one of the final frontiers of making sure we have full inclusivity of persons with disabilities.
Well, you see, I think this is why it really resonates with me, because for me, if we do not have an inclusive business system, we will never have an inclusive society. And for us within the Valuable 500, we believe the scale of the disability inequality crisis is just far too large for governments and charities alone to resolve. It needs the economy, it needs business to value and to release the potential of this extraordinary consumer market talent that we've been leaving to the side. And I think when I listen to you talking about the gentleman that employed your brother, or the CEO of Walgreens. Do you think that leaders have to have that personal connection with disability to actually make the leap to see the value? Is that where you see it, that we need to use data and stories? So we have to use the stats and our heart? Like, where do you think that tipping point is for this business leadership?
Certainly personal connectivity has a lot to do with it. What led Walgreens was Randy Lewis. And Randy Lewis had a son with autism.
Okay.
And he started making these changes. So that connected. But I also think we need better connectivity between businesses. Those that have been successful at this need to reach out to others and sort of be the parents, if you might, of other companies.
Yeah.
Our chambers of commerce, our development consortiums, things like that, really need to make this as one of their top items. And it has to go beyond just corporate social responsibility.
Yes.
That can't be the bottom line on this. The bottom line has to be to get qualified people from all walks of life. You know, Caroline, I've never asked a private sector business to ever hire a person with a disability for a job for which that person was not qualified. Yeah. All I ask the business is, you tell me what the qualifications are. There'll be people out there with disabilities that fit those qualifications. Now, all I'm asking of you as a private sector, in your human resources, I'm back to that, do better outreach. Let the disability community know that not only is this available, but we want you. We welcome you, and we know we're going to be a better business if you work for us. It's not that we're just going to help you, you're going to help us too.
I think the idea that you also talk about that business share best practice, and I think that's one of the things about the Harkin Summit, that when we see business come together in a safe place and share best practice, they go, oh yeah, like why not? And we see this in the Valuable 500. There is nothing more powerful than business leaders sharing their stories, talking about what works, what doesn't work. And then we kind of see the progress and the movement because it's encouraging and motivating each other, right?
That's exactly right. One thing I forgot that I think businesses can do, the last bill I passed before I left the Senate, something we call here the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It's a fancy name. But I set aside 15% of federal monies that go to each of the states in their vocational rehabilitation to provide for summer jobs, after school jobs, weekend jobs, job shadowing for kids with disabilities in the private sector. And so we're asking businesses that, you know, businesses always hire kids for summer jobs or weekend or after school. Bring in kids with disabilities so they start to learn at an early age that we expect them to go to work. We expect them to be members of the working community when they finish their studies and their school. It's that idea of having high expectations rather than low expectations.
Yes.
So one of the things I want businesses to do is to be more aggressive in having job shadowing summer jobs for kids, high school kids with disabilities.
You know, we're just coming to the end, and I want to just ask you a little bit about the election, but you've prompted me to think about, wasn't it George Bush who said the soft bigotry of low expectation? And I think that is, you know, you're absolutely right. It's about creating a society, a nation, a world that expects for each and every one of our potentials to be released. It demands it of us. We need that. And that needs to be really communicated from the leaders in our society, right across all aspects of our society, including business. Which kind of brings me to the last question, and I know where we are today. We are it's today the 29th of October, and in a few days' time, you know, America goes to the polls. Well, actually, many people have already voted. How are you feeling about it right now, and what this means for mainstream human inclusion? And how are you feeling about this election?
The one good thing about disability policy in America, ever since I first got started in it back in the 70s, it's always been really bipartisan. We've had good Republicans like Bob Dole, Senator Dole. You mentioned President George H.W. Bush, who was just phenomenal, and so many others, and Democrats and Republicans. It was always really very nonpartisan, bipartisan. Until lately, it's when we brought up the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, supported by Bob Dole and President Bush, and all former presidents supported it. Yet a small fraction of very, I wouldn't even say conservative, right-wing senators killed it. And to this day, we're still not a signatory of that.
I know.
And there's been other things that we've tried to bring up to do. And I never thought I would live to ever see a president of the United States, or at least a potential president of the United States, mock a person with a disability. When Donald Trump did that, that left me. And when he did that, when he mocked a person with a disability, as though that person was kind of less than human. So probably comes as no surprise to you or anyone that I'm looking forward to a Joe Biden as president. I know him. I served with him for 30 years in the Senate. I know him well. I know his heart. I know his mind. He's a good person. He's hard-headed. He's not a radical one way or the other. And I think he has the ability to kind of bring us together. Plus, I might add, I also had a hand in forming his disability policy statement that he put out, which I think is very good. And I believe with that administration, we can begin to change some of the things I mentioned, like the Medicaid thing that will enable more people to go to work, that will have better investments in workforce and developing workforces among persons with disabilities in America, to make sure that we do a really much better job of bringing businesses together to discuss and to promote this idea of full inclusion. Not one thing has ever been done by the Trump administration in that regard about, again, bringing the business community together and saying, okay, let's set a goal. Like, as you know, Caroline, I set a goal at our summits that in 10 years,
Yes, you did.
We need to double the rate of employment of persons with disabilities. Just over 10 years, just double it. Well, we could do that with a leader in the White House. We could get that done. And I believe that we could still join the rest of the world in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities with a new president and a new Senate. And I'm hopeful we can get that done soon also.
Well, I cannot agree with you more. It is possible. It is absolutely possible with the will and intention. And I think more importantly, with people working together collaboratively. And so I just want to thank you, Senator Harkin, for all that you're doing and for doing this valuable 500 leadership conversation, because what we are really trying to do is to bring some of the most intentional CEOs in the world together globally to make sure that the target of yours is reached, but not just in America, but all around the world, because we're part of the same global family. So a huge thank you. Very best of luck to everybody in the US over the next few days. We'll be thinking of you. And we will see you at the Harkin Summit in December. So
December the 10th, it'll be virtual, obviously, and we'll see you there. And thank you. And thank you for all your leadership, especially in pulling together the valuable 500. This is fantastic. To me, I think if someone were asked me to define who is Caroline Casey, I would say, look in the dictionary under immutable force.
You just mean troublemaker. That's what it is. It's just a troublemaker who won't go away.
Who gets things done. And so I thank you so much for what you've done with the business community and pulling everybody together on this. Just been phenomenal. So thank you so much.
Well, no, it's an absolute pleasure. We don't do it alone. And we want to have we have huge respect for our American valuable 500 companies and hope to have more. And we will see you on the 10th of December. And as I say, good luck for next week.
Thanks, Caroline. Bye. See you.